Welcome, students. In this class, we are going to be talking a lot about moral issues pertaining to the business environment, an environment where a great many of us spend a great deal of our lives. The moral issues we are going to talk about revolve around how we are to survive in the workplace without turning into people we know we do not want to be. Each of us wants to make a decent amount of money and have a good life, but in some clear sense, we don't want to compromise who we are. We like to think of ourselves as good people, and as a consequence, we like to think that we can get by in the workplace without having to do something we know we ought not to do or allow to happen. However, talking about moral issues, whether in the workplace or not, can be heated. Just watch an episode of Crossfire or some segment of a news show that touches on something important to you. In general, moral topics often bring about emotional reactions. The reason why is that morality is tied to things that are important to us as humans, such as how we want to be treated by others and how we want others to be treated. So the first thing we need to get out is what the definition of an argument is. An argument is a set of statements, some of which are intended to support a single statement. The statements that offer the support are called premises, and the statement that is supported is called the conclusion. The premises of an argument are the reasons for the conclusion. The conclusion is some statement that the reasons are offered in support of. The role of the premises is to present or display reasons for believing the conclusion. I want to now contrast this definition of an argument with something arguments are often confused with. Arguments are often confused with disagreements. Often people think that a disagreement is an argument or that an argument requires a disagreement. However, two people can disagree about something without ever giving an argument, and a single person can construct an argument that no one disagrees with. A disagreement occurs when two or more people believe or assert the opposite thing. For example, one person may say, chocolate ice cream is horrible, and another person may say, chocolate ice cream is wonderful. These two people disagree about how good chocolate ice cream is. Nevertheless, there is no argument present. There is no argument present because neither of these people has offered reasons for their beliefs. When an argument is present, there are reasons for a belief. There are statements that can be considered which support a position. So in this class, we do not want to confuse arguments with disagreements. Sometimes people get emotional because they disagree, yet they fail to present arguments that can be considered. Just watch the news. Sometimes it is hard to determine when an argument is present or being given. It turns out, though, that there are special words in language that help signal that an argument is present. Some words signal that a premise is present, and others when a conclusion is present. For example, the phrase so, it follows that, and therefore are all conclusion indicators. They are words that signal that a conclusion is being given. By contrast, words like since, because, and given that are premise indicators. They signal that a reason is being given. Here is a concrete example where we find a premise indicator and a conclusion indicator. Since drug use affects work performance, and anything that affects work performance is job relevant, it follows that drug testing employees at work is morally permissible. In the argument above, the word since marks the two premises which lead to the conclusion that drug testing employees is morally permissible. In addition, if we look closely at the argument, it looks as though the author is assuming another premise in the argument. The kind of premise that is at play is called a suppressed premise, because it is not explicitly stated. A suppressed premise is a statement that is part of an argument but not explicitly stated. In our example, the suppressed premise would be a claim like the following. If an activity is job relevant, then it is morally permissible for an employer to inquire into or seek to determine whether an employee engages in that activity. Often, in our discussions and inquiries, it will be important for us to determine whether there are any suppressed premises in an argument. Given that there may be suppressed premises in an argument, ethicists often like to number the premises and mark the conclusion so that a person engaged in the discussion knows explicitly what reasons are at play and what we think our reasons lead toward. The technique of stating reasons explicitly provides for an atmosphere of honesty in inquiry. Remember, the goal of moral discourse is to inquire into what we should believe and how we should act in the world. As a consequence, representing our reasons and conclusions clearly helps the process of evaluating reasons as a group. Consider our issue, drug testing in the workplace. An ethicist, wanting to be explicit about a specific argument on this issue, might state their reasons as follows. Drug use adversely affects job performance, leading to suboptimal employee performance, which causes lower productivity, higher costs, and consequently lower profits for the employer. Any information about an employee that will help determine whether or not he or she will perform at a suboptimal level is job relevant with respect to hiring the person and with respect to keeping them on as a continuing employee. Therefore, information gained through drug testing relating to drug use is job relevant. If information about an applicant is job relevant, then it is not morally impermissible to make it a condition of being employed. Drug testing is a means of acquiring information about drug use, so drug testing is morally permissible. Here we have a long argument for the conclusion that drug testing in the workplace is morally permissible. The main conclusion is at 6 and signaled by the conclusion indicator SO. The person is arguing for the conclusion that drug testing is morally permissible. The reasons for believing the conclusion are given in 1 through 5. However, on closer inspection, we should note that this argument in fact contains a sub-argument, whose conclusion is given at 3 and signaled by the word therefore. The reasons for believing 3 are given by 1 and 2. In this class, you will encounter many arguments like this. Learn how to present your own ideas in this kind of format and respond to arguments formulated in this way. Now that we have a grasp on what an argument looks like, we need to ask the big question. How do we evaluate arguments? The honest answer to this question is that it's a very hard thing to do. Evaluating arguments takes a lot of energy and skill, and at a certain stage in argument evaluation, there just aren't any hard and fast rules. Nevertheless, there are 2 criteria that most ethicists and philosophers agree are important when it comes to arguments. These criteria are the foundation for the evaluation of arguments. These 2 criteria form a kind of stepladder for thinking about arguments. Our first criterion is validity. The first thing we want to know about an argument is whether or not the premises support the conclusion. That is, we want to know whether it is the case that if the premises were true, the conclusion would be true. The formal definition of validity is the following. An argument is valid if it is impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false at the same time. Why is validity important? Validity is important because sometimes we do not know what is true and what is false, but we may be able to determine whether we are reasoning in a manner that would lead us to truth if our premises were true. Consider the following example. If the galaxy Bob has 32 planets in it, then Bob is a large galaxy. Premise 2. Bob is a large galaxy, therefore, Bob has 32 planets in it. Suppose you are a cosmologist reasoning about distant galaxies that have not yet been explored, and you are thinking that if Bob has 32 planets in it, then it is a large galaxy. Suppose next that we come upon some additional evidence that leads us to believe that Bob is large, such as that there are a certain number of stars in the galaxy, and we thus claim that Bob is large. Should we conclude that Bob has 32 planets in it? The answer is no. We would be reasoning poorly. We would be reasoning in a way that is such that even if our premises are true, our conclusion could still be false. In fact, our reasoning would be invalid. An argument is invalid if it is possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false at the same time. Let me explain this a little more. Here we have 2 arguments that differ in content but share the same form. Argument A and B are different in content because they are about different things. One is about businesses and institutions, and the other is about lawyers and corrupt individuals. Nevertheless, both arguments share a form in common. Their common form can be captured as follows. Consider the form of our argument. Premise 1, some S are M. Premise 2, some M are P. Conclusion, some S are P. In A, S stands for the category businesses, M stands for the category corrupt corporations, and P stands for the category institutions that launder money. In B, S stands for the category lawyers, M stands for the category good negotiators, and P stands for the category corrupt individuals. So although the two arguments are about different things, there is a common form that can be abstracted away that captures the basic kind of reasoning involved. Now, validity is concerned with the form of an argument. When a particular argument is claimed to be valid, it is because it has a form that is such that it is impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. So, when we are evaluating arguments, often the first question we ask is whether the argument is valid. Is the form of the argument valid? That is the form of the argument such that if the premises were true, the conclusion would have to be true? One way to test whether an argument is valid is to attempt to provide a counterexample to the argument. A counterexample is an example that shows that the argument form can have true premises and a false conclusion. Informal fallacies are ways of reasoning that are in some sense bad because they do not offer good reasons for believing the conclusion of the argument, even if they are true or formulated in a valid pattern. The study of informal fallacies is vast and too involved for us here to give a thorough examination. So I want to talk about a couple of fallacies as a way of illustrating how we should not reason when engaged in reasoned discourse. These fallacies are common. Our first fallacy is the appeal to force. An argument commits the fallacy of appeal to force when the conclusion is supported by a threat. Appeals to force are bad because we don't want someone to come to believe something because we are threatening them. Threats are not good indicators of the truth. Our example, you should vote for Jimmy or else you will suffer the consequences. This is a bad argument because the person offering it is appealing to force in order to get you to believe the conclusion. Here's another fallacy, the appeal to pity. An argument commits the fallacy of appeal to pity when the conclusion is supported by evoking pity on the part of the audience. Appeals to pity are bad because we don't want someone to believe what we say is true because they feel bad for us. Feeling bad for a person may motivate you to act in a good way in certain cases, but it's not a good indicator of the truth. Example, you should give me a better grade for the course. I had a really rough semester. My girlfriend broke up with me and my roommate told me that he wants me to move out. Clearly the person is asking for a good grade on the basis of evoking pity for the circumstance they are in. But pity is not a good reason to believe something. A word of caution. Not every argument that evokes pity on the part of the audience is guilty of committing the fallacy of appeal to pity. Consider the following case. Veal calves are kept in small wooden crates that cramp them. They are given no iron at all in their diet, which makes them unhealthy and in constant yearning for iron. They really should outlaw this kind of thing. In this kind of case, the person is clearly trying to evoke some pity on behalf of the audience, but he is not trying to get you to believe in the conclusion based on that pity. It just happens to be the case that pity is evoked. So, remember, not every case in which pity is evoked through an argument is an instance of committing the fallacy of appeal to pity. Let's now move on to another kind of fallacy, argument against the person. An argument commits the fallacy of argument against the person when the arguer rejects another person's statement or argument due to the nature of the person who made the statement or argument rather than on the merits of the statement or argument itself. One common form of ad hominem fallacy, or argument against the person, occurs when the arguer responds to another person's argument by attacking the person rather than the argument. Consider the following example. Person A says there should be more gun control since guns are harmful. Person B says, no, there should not. You are just another bleeding heart liberal. Notice that person B attacks person A instead of person A's reason for believing that there should be more gun control. Example. Person A says, we should invade Iraq because the people there are being oppressed. Person B says, you don't care about oppressed people, you just want to invade the country. Again, person A gives a reason for why we should invade Iraq, and person B attacks the person rather than the reason for invading Iraq. Let's now move on to another fallacy, called the genetic fallacy. An argument commits the genetic fallacy when the arguer infers that one thing has a property because it originated from something that had the property. Let's look at some examples. Johnny must be a racist since his parents are racists. Example. The only reason why you believe that animals are important is because you were raised in a community where everyone believes that animals are important. Had you not been raised there, you would not have believed that animals are important. In this example, we run across a strong form of the genetic fallacy. The person is arguing against another person's belief on the basis of its origin. However, the person could have an argument for believing that animals are important. In the example above, the element that is mistaken is that the focus is on the origin of the person's belief and not on the beliefs themselves. This is a very poor way of reasoning. Let's move on to our final fallacy, the legal to moral fallacy. Oftentimes in reasoning about morality, people like to appeal to what is legal and illegal. The general kind of reasoning has two forms. It is legal to do X, so it is morally permissible to do X. It is illegal to do X, so it is morally impermissible to do X. However, in moral reasoning, both patterns are bad. We generally don't want to move from facts about what is legal to facts about what is moral. One reason why is because laws change over time and vary from culture to culture. But in some sense, what is morally right and wrong does not change over time. Our beliefs about what is morally right and wrong may change over time. Perhaps what is morally right and wrong doesn't change over time. So we need to step away from the legal when talking about the moral. Here is an example that clearly shows that we don't want to reason from the legal to the moral. It is legal to own slaves, so it is morally permissible to own slaves. At one time in history, the premise was true. However, most of us want to say that it was never true that it was morally permissible to own slaves. Something is deeply intrinsically wrong with slavery, such that it could never be sanctioned by morality. In addition, even right now, if some rogue country held no legal code against slavery, we would not say that it is morally permissible in that rogue country to own slaves. What we would say is that it happens to be legal in the rogue nation to own slaves, but there is something deeply morally wrong with that. So, there are a lot of fallacies and bad ways we can reason. And part of engaging in reasoned discourse is being sensitive to the ways in which each of us can go wrong in reasoning. As a consequence, it is good to form a community of thinkers to help each other avoid errors and find insights. That is, in part, what this class is about, helping each other reason about moral problems in the workplace and discovering insights about how to identify and navigate moral issues.